Hello again, Randy back in the shop today. I was just going to go over some more on the big block Chevy, the 396 block that I have here that I'm working on. Excuse me. The reason I had the block line board is the previous owner had some machine work done to it where they line honed the block, and I measured the housing bore in the block. The front and the rear main were at the high limit, which is, let's see here, let me look in the book. It is 2.938 is the high limit of what the housing bore can be, where the crank bearing or the main bearing fits in. The end two were at the high limit. The middle three were a half a thousandths big, and that's no good because you need that crush on the bearing to hold the bearing in the block to keep it from spinning. So took the block to machine shop, and I had them line bore it where Brian there, he took the caps off and he cut about 10 thousandths off this surface here and bolted them back on, set up the machine, and we cut them. The surface of the block itself, the main bearing surface of the block, we just lightly skimmed that. The rest of the material all came out of the main cap itself, and as you can see, this is a factory cap out of a small block Chevy that I converted to 4-bolt main. And this cap from the factory, because I know the block because it was a complete motor when I got it. It had never been apart. This machine surface here has not been honed. It was just line board. There's a big debate going on. Some people say that you have to, the only way to do it is line honing. You can't fix a block that's bad with a line hone. It just can't be done. You can machine it within a half a thousandth of where you want it, and then lightly touch it up with the line hone. But if you've got a block that's bad, you're going to spend hours and hours and hours with that thing trying to fix it with a line hone. My opinion is line bore the block and it will be straight. And if you want to touch it up with a line honed to get the last, 3/4 tenths out of it or half a thousandth, that's fine. But if the line bore is bad, it's bad. The only way to fix it is to line bore it. I'll set this camera up on the block here in a minute, and we'll bring the bore gauge over. I got the bore gauge set, and I'll show you what the thing looks like. Be right back.
And then you just feel whether you're shaking or not. And usually not too bad.
Okay, I got this camera set up here, and I'm putting the gauge in the front main of the block, and you can see right there I'm a couple of tenths under the I set my micrometer that I set this bore gauge for the middle of the spec, which is I gotta check and see here. I don't remember what it is. The minimum specification is 2.937, and the big end is 2.938, and right there I'm about dead nuts on 2.9375, which is where you want to be. I'll go to the next one here. We're about depending on where you hold this, we're about 3/10 over on that one. Move this here, we'll slide this back, and we'll get the next one. That one there is right on. 2.9375. That's good. That's the middle of the specification in the bearing book, and that way you'll have the proper amount of crush. And I didn't want the bearings the housing bore set at the minimum, because the crank is ground 10 under, and they don't make a 1 over or 1 under bearing for a 10 under bearing. You get 10 under, you get 20 under, you get 30 under, but you can't split it. And I didn't want it to be too tight. I'll be right back. Okay, back at the bench. That explains a little bit on how the line boring works versus line hone. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the caps off and put the bearings in. I'll reset the dial bore gauge for my crankshaft journal diameter, because I already mic'd the crankshaft, and we'll check it, see how much bearing clearance we have. I'll get that ready and I'll bring you back. All right, I got you over at the block here. I got the main bearings all in the block. The bearing caps are torqued down to specs. If you're using bolts, or if you're using ARP studs, if you're using factory bolts, go by the factory specification. This one here has ARP studs. ARP recommends 110 foot-pounds, so that's where I put them. I'm going to set this down here and we'll check the clearance on the front bearing. I set my micrometer to what I had measured on the crankshaft journal, and then I set the bore gauge, so the bore gauge is 0 at the actual crankshaft diameter, and this will measure your clearance. And I've got 2 and a couple tenths, 2 and 3 tenths, something like that. Two and a half. I went through and checked them all. They're all right on size where they should be. All right, I'm back over at the bench here now. Explain a little bit how you check clearances and whatnot. Also, if you're going to do a deal like this here, what you want to do, and you can go online, if I can get this to work now. You can go online and download a build sheet and save it to your computer, and when you're measuring everything, write it down, and that way you don't forget. And when you get done with the motor, print it up, staple it together with whatever dyno documentation you got, or anything else, and file it away, and that way you can remember. And also it has a place in here where you can put down part numbers for like your bearings and your camshaft and whatever else. Write it down and keep a record of it, because after a period of time you tend to forget, or you think you remember but you don't remember exactly, or whatever, or you know, when the motor comes time to be pulled apart for a freshener or whatnot, you're trying to remember what parts you used. It just saves a lot of headache in the long run. So just another little tip that I found that I really like. It's saves a lot of time sometimes. So that's it for now, and have a good one. We'll see you. One thing I wanted to mention too that's nice about the line boring versus line honing, when you line bore a block, when you just slightly skim the housing bores in the block and you take the majority of the material out of the cap, you don't change your center to center distance between your crankshaft and your camshaft. You don't close that up very much. So you don't have to worry about your timing chain being too loose. 9 times out of 10 you can put a stock chain, you know, the stock length chain in it, and it's good. Once in a while it's a rare occasion, but you have to get a shorter chain, which they make them in 5/1000 and 10,000 shorter. But when you line hone a block, you close that distance up. There's just no way around it. So that's the advantage of doing a line borer, because you can set the machine up so it just lightly kisses the housing bore in the block and takes the majority of the material out of the cap to make it straight, because that's where the crank rests on when the motor's together and it's right side up. It's resting on the caps, not on the top side. So just some more information that you can use.